Why was Sarah Chun's hand trembling over the propeller blade? The morning sun spilled across the tarmac at Desert Sky Aviation, heat shimmering over the asphalt. She moved like she was following a ritual no one else understood. Fingertips tracing rivets, eyes scanning for invisible threats. To her students, it was overkill. To Sarah, it was survival. Jake Morrison, a swaggering 22-year-old with expensive sunglasses and exactly 43 hours of flight time, strolled up like he owned the place. He joked about her being like one of his dad's old military buddies. But when he asked if she'd ever served, she froze for a heartbeat too long before replying. Just careful, she didn't mention how her eyes were already tracking every moving aircraft, calculating closure rates like a reflex she'd never unlearned. 20 minutes into their lesson, Jake tried to show off. A sharp dive, a hard bank. The stall warning screamed at 200 feet above the desert floor. In that instant, Sarah changed. Calm precision, perfect recovery, authority in her voice that made Jake snap to attention. The other instructors saw it too. Something in her that didn't belong to an ordinary flight school. That night, alone, in her apartment, she stared at a locked metal box, holding medals she'd never display and dog tags belonging to those who'd never come home. She told herself she'd left that life behind, but the past doesn't stay buried forever. Why was every phone in the building screaming the same alert? Sarah was reviewing lesson plans when the world fractured. A hijacked airliner over Los Angeles. Threats to crash it into Dodger Stadium. 55,000 lives. Military jets roared overhead on the TV. Grainy news footage showed the Boeing 737 circling downtown. The hijackers were using the city as both shield and weapon. Then a breaking update. The lead interceptor pilot had been forced to turn back. Panic attack. The trauma of a similar crash years ago finally breaking him. Outside, a black SUV rolled onto the flight line. The woman who stepped out was older now, silver in her hair. But Sarah would have recognized General Patricia Morrison anywhere. 4 years since they'd spoken. 4 years since Sarah had walked away from the Air Force without looking back. "Colonel Chun," Morrison said, and the room fell silent. The backup pilot was still 20 minutes away. The airliner would hit its target in 18. Only one F-22 was ready. Morrison's voice carried desperation and something else. "You're the only one who's done this before." Without firing a shot, why was her old call sign sewn back on her flight suit? On the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base, the F-22 Raptor gleamed like a predator in the sun. Sarah's fingers moved over the controls like she'd never left. Morrison's voice came through the headset. The hijackers weren't making demands, just broadcasting death to America. The Raptor surged forward, lifting into the sky like it had been waiting for her. 11 minutes to impact, Sarah leveled off, broke the sound barrier, and spotted the airliner. Flying too low, too aggressively, Hawk Patterson, her old wingman now running the operation, came on the radio. Explosives wired in the cabin. Any aggressive move could set them off. The margin for error had just disappeared. What do you do when you can't fire, can't threaten, can't even get too close? Sarah dropped into the airliner's blind spot. The hijackers couldn't see her on radar. She told Hawk she was going to attempt a physical intercept. Not ramming, nudging, matching speed exactly, easing the Raptor's wingtip within feet of the Boeing's. She applied the gentlest pressure. The airliner began drifting off course. Confused voices came over the hijacker's frequency. Something was wrong with the controls. She kept guiding them away from downtown, micro-adjustments steady as a heartbeat. The maneuver had never been attempted in aviation history, and she was doing it live, with the world watching. Would the sound of her voice be enough? She keyed the hijacker's frequency, introduced herself by her old rank and call sign. Colonel Sarah Reaper Chun, told them their plane was under her control, invited them to look out the left window, when the lead hijacker's eyes locked. On the Raptor impossibly close to his wing, his expression shifted from defiance to terror. She named him Khalid al-Rashed, former Iraqi Air Force, and recited details only someone with deep intel could know. He argued, but the edge in his voice was gone. The stadium slipped out of the danger zone below as she kept talking, weaving facts with psychological pressure, keeping them too off-balance to make a deadly move. What if surrender wasn't their plan at all? Al-Rashed threatened to detonate the explosives rather than give up. Sarah pointed out his fuel gauge. 20 minutes of fuel left. Not enough to reach another target. Barely enough for the ocean. She was already steering them toward Vandenberg Air Force Base. Hawk's voice crackled over the coms. "What you're doing?" "It's impossible," Sarah replied. "Sometimes impossible is just something nobody's tried yet." Below, the Pacific stretched out like a final deadline. Would they choose to live? Vandenberg's runway appeared in the distance. Emergency. Cruise in position, Sarah gave them one final choice. Land or face, while her call sign had been retired. Silence. Then a broken voice. "We will land." The demand for safe passage was cut short by her reminder that the passengers deserved better than they'd been offered. 20 minutes later, the 737 touched down under her escort. The FBI swarmed the aircraft. Hawk's voice was thick with emotion. Mission accomplished. All passengers safe. Sarah pulled the Raptor into a victory roll, the first in 4 years, before heading back to base. But she knew the quiet life she'd built was gone. What do you do after the world remembers your name? When she landed, Morrison asked if she was ready to come back. Sarah surprised her. She was exactly where she needed to be. But she had a proposal. 6 months later, Desert Sky Aviation had become the Sarah Chun Center for Advanced Flight Training, a joint civilian-military hub for anti-terrorism aviation tactics. Jake Morrison, once the overconfident student who nearly killed them both, was its first graduate. Watching him drill emergency procedures, Sarah understood something. The best way to serve isn't always in the cockpit of a fighter jet. Sometimes, it's in passing your hard-earned skills to those who will need them most. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why was every phone in the building screaming the same alert? It started as a vibration in Sarah Chun's desk, a phone buzzing against the wood grain. Then another and another. Within seconds, every device in the cramped instructor's office was lighting up. Cell phones, the wall-mounted landline, the old VHF radio crackling with static-laced urgency. Her eyes darted to the message flashing across every screen. This is not a drill. Commercial Flight 447 hijacked over Los Angeles airspace. All civilian aircraft land immediately. The air in the office seemed to thin. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah's lesson plan sat open in front of her. The neat block letters on the page, suddenly irrelevant. Outside the window, the California sky was cloudless, bright, but heavy with the distant rumble of military jets. She stepped to the glass, scanning instinctively. Contrails, white slashes high above the desert. F-22 Raptors from Edwards, their formation arrowing southwest. The television in the corner was already on. News helicopters were keeping their distance, their lenses struggling to capture the hijacked Boeing 737 circling Los Angeles in slow, menacing arcs. The transponder was set to the international hijack code. The voice of Maria Santos, another instructor, cracked behind her. "They can't shoot it down. There are passengers." She didn't say the number. Sarah already knew it. 180 souls on board. And then the worst-case detail. The hijackers weren't climbing away from the city. They were staying low, weaving between the dense urban sprawl, using it as both camouflage and threat. The choice was deliberate. They were a shield wrapped in steel and fuel. Sarah's mind was already calculating speed, altitude, potential intercept vectors, time to target. She didn't say it out loud. Not yet, but she knew exactly what they were thinking downtown. You couldn't neutralize that plane without killing everyone inside it. And if you hesitated too long, you lost the stadium too. Her phone vibrated again. This time, no number displayed. Just a short, urgent text. Turn on channel 7, now. She grabbed the remote. The feed was shaky, handheld. A news crew filming from an LA rooftop. The reporter's voice was tight, hurried, fighting the wind. Military sources confirmed that the lead interceptor pilot has suffered what appears to be a severe panic attack mid-mission and has returned to base. We're told the pilot recognized the hijacked aircraft as the same model involved in a crash 5 years ago that killed his brother. This comes with just 17 minutes remaining before Flight 47's projected arrival over Dodger Stadium. Sarah closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The image came unbidden. Captain Mike Torch Rodriguez, one of the finest she'd ever flown. Beside, and his younger brother, gone in that accident. The grief had never left him. Now, when the nation needed him, it had claimed him entirely. The screech of tires outside cut through her thoughts. She turned to the window. A black SUV rolled to a stop by the hangar, dust curling around its tires. The doors opened with practiced precision. The first figure out wore no uniform, but carried the unmistakable weight of command. Her stride was purposeful, shoulders squared, silver hair catching the sun. Sarah felt something shift deep in her chest. General Patricia Morrison for years. That's how long it had been since Sarah had last seen her. The day she turned in her resignation, walked away from the Air Force, and vanished into the anonymity of civilian life. Tom Bradley, the chief instructor, had stepped out onto the tarmac to meet her. Confusion etched across his face. What the hell is the military doing here? He muttered. Sarah already knew. She met Morrison at the doorway. For a moment, they stood frozen in the kind of silence that carries history. 1,000 unspoken words packed into a single shared glance. Colonel Chun, Morrison said finally. Her voice formal, resonant. The room behind Sarah seemed to inhale all at once. Jake Morrison, no relation to the general, blinked hard, his mouth falling open. Maria's eyes widened. She took a step back, one hand instinctively clutching her phone as though to record this surreal moment. Tom Bradley just stared. It's just Sarah now, she replied, low and even, but something in her posture shifted, as if invisible armor had slid back into place. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. Morrison stepped inside, scanning the room once before focusing entirely on Sarah. Sarah, she said, tone softening just slightly. We don't have time for pleasantries. I need you to come with me now. I'm retired, General. You know that. The pilot for the intercept just washed out. Panic attack. The backup's still 20 minutes from Edwards. Morrison's voice was brisk now, urgent. That aircraft is going to hit Dodger Stadium in 18 minutes. We have one F-22 fueled and ready. No one available who can handle what's required. Except you. There are dozens of qualified pilots. Not for this. Morrison's eyes held hers. The hijackers aren't talking, no demands. Intelligence believes they're planning a suicide run, using passengers as shields. We need someone who can think outside the manual. Someone who can get close enough to push them off course without causing panic. Or triggering an explosion through the office window. The TV screen still showed the 737 circling, a white speck in the hazy LA skyline. Sarah didn't need radar to know its heading, its speed, the dwindling time. Morrison stepped closer. You're the only pilot I know who's ever talked down a hostile aircraft without firing a shot. Syria, that refugee camp, you remember. Sarah's mind flashed back to the desert, the comms crackling, the enemy ace's voice breaking as she convinced him to turn away rather than die. A miracle, they'd called it later. It hadn't. Felt like one at the time. Jake's voice broke the moment. Wait, you're a colonel? You. She didn't acknowledge him. Her thoughts were already in the air, running intercept scenarios, trimming variables, discarding anything that didn't end with the stadium intact. The call sign was Reaper, wasn't it? Morrison added, quieter now. 13 confirmed kills. 3 hostile intercepts resolved without firing. Only pilot to survive, being shot down behind enemy lines, twice. The hum of the old wall fan seemed suddenly too loud. Even the TVs had gone quiet in the minds of those in the room. The anchor's voice broke the stillness. We now have confirmation that Flight 447 has altered course and is heading directly toward Dodger Stadium. Estimated time to impact, 16 minutes. Sarah turned from the screen to Morrison. The decision crystallized in her chest. Where's the plane? Why was her old call sign sewn back on her flight suit? The drive to Edwards Air Force Base blurred past in a haze of sun-bleached asphalt and flashing lights. A security convoy swallowed Sarah's car, sirens splitting the dry desert air inside. The SUV's air conditioning roared, but Sarah barely felt it. Her focus tunneled forward, not to the base, but to the cockpit she hadn't touched in 4 years. The gates opened on command, and the convoy rolled straight toward a row of hardened shelters. The F-22 Raptor sat in the open, its angular skin absorbing the sunlight like it had been forged. From shadows, even at rest, the jet radiated potential energy, the kind of stillness that precedes a strike. An airman jogged up with a garment bag. "Ma'am, your flight suit." She unzipped it without thinking. The smell hit her first, that faint chemical scent of Nomex, layered with memories she had locked away. When she unfolded it, her breath caught. The patch was still there, stitched with meticulous precision over her heart. Reaper. No one had called her that since the day she'd walked away. The weight of it pressed against her chest, not as a burden, but as a reminder of skill honed in fire, of moments when hesitation would have meant death. She slid into the suit like slipping back into an old skin. General Morrison appeared. Beside her, headset slung around her neck. 14 minutes to projected impact, she said. We've shortened pre-flight, just enough checks to keep you safe. The rest you'll have to trust to instinct. Sarah's voice was calm, but her hands betrayed her. Fingers flexing, itching for controls. Fuel load? Full internal base clean, no armament. Rules of engagement are non-lethal unless the president says otherwise. And Sarah, Morrison's gaze locked on hers. They've already said death to America. They mean to finish this. And engine spool-up roared in the distance. Another jet taxiing. But Sarah knew it wasn't for her. Her bird was the only one ready. Hawk Patterson's voice crackled through the comms the moment she stepped onto the ladder. Reaper, been a long time. His tone was warmer than she expected, but clipped. Flight 447's holding 15,000 feet. Heading 270, 380 knots. Radio silent. Transponder still squawking hijack. You'll intercept in 6 minutes if you push. Sarah dropped into the seat, the cockpit wrapping around her like it had been waiting. The HUD flickered. Alive. The glass canopy turning the desert into a panoramic war map. Muscle memory took over. Left hand to throttles, right to stick. She toggled the radio. Copy, control. Confirm intercept, heading 245. Confirmed. And Reaper. Hawk's voice softened. Just for a breath. CNN, BBC. Every network's live. Whole world's watching. No pressure, she muttered. The ground crew scattered. Morrison gave a single nod. Sarah pushed the throttles forward. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines thundered, the Raptor leaping ahead with a violence that pressed her into the seat. The runway blurred, then dropped away entirely. The sky swallowed her. She pulled into a climb that would have torn lesser aircraft apart. G-forces pressed down like an invisible hand. The horizon tilted, desert falling away beneath her like a discarded map. 11 minutes, Morrison's voice came through. AWACS has eyes on the target. They're descending. weaving through the skyline, using the buildings as cover. The F-22 sliced through the sound barrier with barely a shudder. Sarah barely noticed the Mach indicator tick upward. She was already searching, and then the blip appeared on her radar, moving steady. Toward the city, she eased back on the throttle. No need to overshoot. Visual contact, she reported, even from 5 miles out. She could see it. The Boeing's flight profile was all wrong. Too low, nose too restless. It wasn't the steady hand of a commercial pilot. This was aggressive flying military hands on civilian controls. Hawk's voice sharpened. "Reaper, be advised. We've got multiple passenger calls. Hijackers have explosives in the cabin. We think they're wired to manual triggers. Any aggressive posture could set them off." Sarah's stomach went cold. That meant no show of force passes, no wing rock warnings. The airliner couldn't be scared. Only shepherded. 8 minutes to impact. The city stretched out below now. Gridwork of streets shimmering in the heat. Millions living their day, unaware that death was closing in at 400 miles an hour. She scanned for options. The old intercept playbook was useless here. This wasn't about speed or weapons. It was about touch, about control, about being close enough to matter, without being seen until it was too late. "Control, I'm going dark." She flipped off her transponder, bled speed, and dropped altitude in a wide arc. The F-22 stealth profile made her a ghost on radar. She slid beneath the Boeing's line of sight, approaching from its blind spot. Hawk's voice jumped in, sharp. "Reaper, what are you doing?" "I'm going to give them a mechanical problem," she said. "Negative, Reaper. You cannot make contact with. I'm not ramming." She cut him off, her voice flat. "I'm nudging." Silence. Then Hawk's low exhale. "Jesus, her." Hands were steady now. Everything else. The sirens, the news chatter, the weight of 55,000 lives, faded into the periphery. 6 minutes to impact. The Boeing's silver fuselage loomed ahead, sunlight flashing off its skin. She matched its speed to the knot, closing the last 50 feet as delicately as threading a needle. From this angle, she could see faces in the windows, passengers pressed to the glass, eyes wide, unaware she was there. 10 feet, 5. She inched the F-22's left wingtip toward the 737's right. Every micro-adjustment measured in fractions of a degree. The space between metal and metal narrowed until the gap was less than the length of her hand. Then, contact. A whisper through the stick. A tremor in her seat. The 737 began to drift. So subtly it could be mistaken for wind shear. But Sarah felt it. The shift in heading. The slow pull away from the stadium's direct line. Through the hijacker's open comes. A voice barked in Arabic. Something's wrong with the controls. She stayed silent. The trick wasn't in announcing herself. It was in letting them believe the aircraft was betraying them on its own. 5 minutes. The stadium was still too close. The Boeing's nose angled enough to swing back with the right correction. But she was in their shadow now, and they didn't even know it. What do you do when you can't fire? Can't threaten? Can't even get too close? 4 minutes and 49 seconds to impact. The Boeing 737's wing filled Sarah's canopy. Her fighter floated alongside in a space so tight it would make most pilots sweat through their gloves. Every muscle in her arms and shoulders stayed loose. Tension meant overcorrection. And overcorrection here meant catastrophe. Through the passenger windows, shapes moved. Panicked faces, hands gripping armrests. A child's wide eyes pressed to the glass. None of them could see her clearly from this angle. None of them knew the gamble she was taking with every micro-adjustment. The hijackers still hadn't realized they were no longer alone on air. COM frequency. Arabic voices traded short. Clipped sentences. Frustration building. A loud clack of a control lever. Then a curse. The 737 kept drifting, and they couldn't figure out why. Sarah inched her left wingtip closer, firming the pressure against the Boeing's right wing. The subtle push forced the larger aircraft into a shallower bank, still on target for the city. But the line to Dodger Stadium was fraying. Her breathing stayed slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Years of combat flying had taught her that heartbeats mattered in moments like this. The body had to stay calm so the mind could stay sharp. Finally, she clicked her come over to the hijackers. Open frequency. Her voice came out even, not loud, not rushed, just certain. "This is Colonel Sarah Chun, United States Air Force," she said. "Your aircraft is under my control. Static." Then a scoff in broken English. "Impossible. We see nothing. You lie." Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the Boeings. "Cockpit windows. Look out your left side," she said. "Wave if you can see me." A dark figure moved into view. A man in black fatigues, head wrapped in a keffiyeh. He leaned forward, peering down the wing. His head jerked. Even through the glass, Sarah saw the flash of fear. The F-22's nose sat just beyond his reach, wingtip kissing his aircrafts like a predator brushing prey. "Allah preserve us," the man whispered into a hot mic. "Not a ghost," Sarah replied, her voice flat. "Just someone who's very good at her job. You have two choices. Surrender now and live, or force me to show you why my call sign is Reaper." The radio went silent, except for quick, panicked breathing. Another voice joined in Arabic, urgent, angry, overlapping. She didn't need to speak the language to hear the argument boiling inside the cockpit. Morrison's voice cut into her military channel. "Reaper, you've got 3 minutes. Keep talking." She keyed the hijacker's frequency again. "Khalid al-Rashed," she said, drawing out the name. "Former Iraqi Air Force. Flew MiG-29s. During the invasion, you were good, but not good enough to outfly an F-22 Raptor." There was a sharp intake of breath. "You know nothing," the man snapped. But it was weaker now. "Oh, I know you lost your brother at Tikrit," she continued, unblinking. "I know you've been planning this for 3 years, and I know. You just realized your mission is over." Below, the stadium slid sideways in her peripheral view. The 737's nose now passing parallel instead of lining up for the center field impact. A grip on the stick stayed feather-light, just enough to keep the drift going. "You've got 180 people on board," she said. "None of them volunteered to die for your war." Al-Rashed came back, brittle but still defiant. "We have explosives. We will detonate before we surrender." Sarah had been waiting for that. "Khalid, check your fuel gauge," she said. A pause. Then, "Enough." "No," she said firmly. "You've got maybe 20 minutes left. Not enough to reach another target. Barely enough to make the ocean. You will land where I tell you, or you'll run out of sky before you run out of excuses." She nudged the Boeing westward, toward the shimmering Pacific, far ahead. The long gray strip of Vandenberg Air Force Base sat waiting like an open hand on the military channel. Hawk's voice was low, half disbelief, half awe. "Reaper, what you're doing, the physics alone. Tell that to the physics," she said, eyes never leaving the Boeing's wing. "Sometimes impossible is just something nobody's tried yet." 2 minutes to impact, if they'd still been headed there. Now the city's skyline was sliding off the Boeing's nose, replaced by coastline and open water. And still, Sarah stayed locked in formation. Close enough for the hijackers to feel her presence, but not close enough for the passengers to panic. The balance was surgical. The pressure on their minds was the real weapon. Would the sound of her voice be enough? The Boeing's engines groaned as the hijackers fought the controls. From Sarah's seat in the Raptor, every twitch of the airliner's wing told her the story. They were overcorrecting now, trying to drag the nose back toward Los Angeles. She didn't let them. A subtle counterpressure kept the drift westward, steady, unyielding on the open frequency. Voices clashed in fast Arabic, one deeper, commanding, another higher, sharp with fear. She caught scattered English. "Fuel. Target. Detonate. Sarah stayed quiet until she knew the moment was right. Then she pressed the transmit. Khalid, she said, using his name like a scalpel. You have one option left that ends with you alive. Silence. You can die over the ocean. Your mission forgotten in days, she continued. Or you can land right now and be the man who spared 180 people. His voice came back, brittle. If I land, America puts me in prison forever. I am no fool. Sarah's tone didn't change. Then choose the other option, and I'll make sure no one even remembers your name. A low, muffled argument erupted in the background. The tone was different now, not a commander ordering, but a leader losing his grip. Morrison's voice came through the military channel. Quiet but urgent. Reaper, you've got them talking. 2 minutes to fuel bingo if your estimate's right. Sarah kept the gentle nudge steady. The Boeing's path now cut over the Pacific, the glittering coastline drifting away in the windows of its passengers. She went in for the final push. Khalid al-Rashed. She said evenly, I know you've been telling yourself this is revenge, that it will even the scales, but let me tell you what will actually happen. If you hit that stadium, you'll kill civilians, women, children, and the world will remember you as nothing but a coward who couldn't win in the air. The cockpit stayed silent. Land at Vandenberg, she said. Face the world in daylight, not die in the dark. A new voice, younger, cracking, came over the hijacker's frequency. We cannot make it to another target. Fuel is too low. Sarah didn't smile. Not yet. Then you land. Now you do this. And every passenger walks away. You fail. And your last view will be the inside of a fireball. Another pause. The ocean slid endlessly below. Vandenberg's runway was a pale strip on the horizon now, growing larger with every passing second. Finally, Khalid's voice came through. Stripped of bluster. We will land, but we demand safe passage. You'll get a fair trial and 3 meals a day, Sarah said, the faintest edge creeping into her tone. That's more than you offered your passengers. On the military channel, Hawk's exhale was loud in her ear. Reaper. You did it. She didn't reply, not until the Boeing's nose dipped slightly, aligning with the approach vector for Vandenberg. Only then did she let her own breath out, slow, steady, like she was exhaling the last 4 years of quiet she'd built around herself. 180 lives, still in the air, but no longer in the crosshairs. What if surrender wasn't their plan at all? The Pacific shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and endless, but Sarah knew the calm was a lie. A Boeing 737, packed with explosives and desperate men, was still under her wing, and 1,000 things could still go wrong before the wheels touched Earth. Reaper, Vandenberg Tower reports runway 30 is clear. Hawk's voice came through. Emergency cruise in place. Winds are calm. Sarah kept her eyes on the airliner's flaps. They were starting to extend slowly, unevenly, the kind of sloppy deployment that spoke of untrained hands on. The controls, stay with them, Morrison's voice ordered from the operations room. If they try to divert, you block them. Copy, Sarah said. She adjusted her position just enough to keep the pressure on the 737's wing. A silent reminder that if Khalid or his men changed their minds, they wouldn't get far on the hijacker's frequency. Khalid's voice crackled. We are descending. Do not fire, Sarah answered calmly. Maintain your course and speed. Vandenberg Tower will guide you in. The coastline was sliding beneath them now, the runway's pale strip growing from a sliver to a defined shape, flanked by fire trucks, ambulances, and rows of armed tactical units. Even from this altitude, Sarah could see the shimmer of sniper scopes catching the sun. Her mind ran through every possible last-ditch move. A suicide detonation before touchdown, an attempted climb-out toward another target, even a deliberate crash into the base itself. She stayed ready for all of it. At 3,000 feet, the Boeing's gear began to drop. One of the passengers must have seen the coastline and realized where they were. The cabin windows were dotted with faces now, pale and anxious, eyes scanning the strange sight of military vehicles clustered like an honor guard. Sarah stayed close enough for Khaled to know she was still there, but not close enough to spook anyone into thinking she might strike. 2 miles, Hawk called. The 737 lined up with the runway. The descent was too fast. Sarah could see it, but the wide military-grade strip would forgive sloppiness. 1/2 mile. The Raptor's shadow skimmed the water before lifting over the dunes. Sarah could hear her own breathing in the helmet now. Steady, deliberate. The Boeing's wheels hit with a puff of smoke, bounced once, then settled. Reverse thrust roared. The airliner slowed, rolling past the first set of taxiway turnoffs before coming to a stop in the middle of the strip. "Reaper, stand by," Hawk said. "FBI's moving in." Sarah banked out wide, climbing just enough to circle above. Below, tactical teams fanned out, moving in practice formation toward the 737. Snipers held their positions on the perimeter. Every vehicle on the airfield was pointed at the jet. The cabin door cracked open. Figures emerged one by one, hands raised. Weapons tossed to the tarmac. Black-clad agents swarmed them, forcing them down. The process was precise, controlled, but Sarah knew the tension wouldn't break until the bomb squad gave the all-clear on the cabin. "Reaper," Hawk's voice was different now, softer, almost human. "Mission accomplished. All passengers and crew are safe. You just prevented the worst terrorist attack since 9/11's. Sarah didn't answer right away. She banked the Raptor into a slow, rolling climb over the coastline for the first time in 4 years. She allowed herself a victory roll, one smooth, deliberate arc above the ocean, a silent salute to every life that had just been spared. Only then did she turn back toward Edwards. She'd gotten them home, but she knew the world would never see her the same way again. Would they choose to live? The desert reappeared on the horizon like an old photograph. Sun-baked earth, distant ridges, heat haze blurring the edges. The adrenaline had begun to ebb, but Sarah felt it still, a low thrum in her chest, the way a jet engine keeps spinning long after shutdown. The voice in her headset was Morrison's. "You're clear to land, Reaper," she acknowledged with a clipped copy, but her eyes stayed forward. The Raptor touched down as though it had been doing it every day for the last 4 years. The tires chirped against the tarmac, the nose dropped, and she rolled toward the waiting crew line. General Morrison stood there, arms folded, the silver in her hair catching the light. Behind her, technicians, ground crew, and even a few young pilots watched in silence. Sarah popped a canopy. The dry air rushed in. Smelling faintly of jet fuel and sun-baked metal, she pulled off her helmet. Setting it on the seat and climbed down the ladder, Morrison stepped forward first, her voice low enough for only Sarah to hear. "You just saved 55,000 people. That's not even counting the 180 on board." Sarah gave a small nod. "They chose to live," she said. "You gave them the chance." There was a pause. Just the wind across the tarmac, the distant whine of another jet taxiing in. "Ready to come back to work?" Morrison asked finally. Sarah almost smiled. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." Morrison tilted her head. "Which is?" "Here, teaching, but maybe we stop pretending these are just weekend pilots on training." Morrison's expression didn't change, but the glint in her eyes said she understood. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah glanced back toward the Raptor. "Something that makes sure the next time this happens, it doesn't take a retired colonel to stop it." Morrison's gaze followed hers. "That's going to take more than a few Cessnas and a flight syllabus." "I know," Sarah said. "I also know you still have contacts at the Pentagon." Morrison let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "You always did think bigger than your orders." Sarah didn't reply. She didn't have to. The decision was already made. Behind them, Jake stood near the hangar doors, still in his instructor blues, still staring at her like he was trying to reconcile the woman who corrected his stalls with the pilot, who'd just outflown a terrorist plot. She caught his eye for a moment. He straightened, not out of surprise this time, but out of respect. For the first time since climbing into the cockpit, Sarah felt the mission's weight settle into something lighter. Not gone, never gone, but carried in a way she could live with. What do you do after the world remembers your name? 6 months later, the tarmac at Desert Sky Aviation looked nothing like the sleepy civilian flight school it had once been. The Cessnas were still there, lined up neatly on the far side of the field, but closer to the main hangar, there were new silhouettes, sleeker, faster aircraft, each bearing the markings of a joint civilian-military training initiative. The sign at the front gate no longer just read Desert Sky Aviation. New name arched across its top, the Sarah Chun Center for Advanced Flight Training. Inside the main hangar, the air was alive with a different kind of energy. Civilian instructors in palas walked alongside military officers in flight suits. Whiteboards held diagrams not just of traffic patterns, but of intercept vectors, hostage scenario communications, and stealth approach profiles. Sarah stood off to the side, coffee in hand, watching as Jake Morrison, the same Jake who'd once stalled a Cessna at 200 feet trying to show off, now briefed a mixed group of Air Force trainees and private pilots on emergency maneuvering under duress. His voice was measured, his posture confident. When he caught sight of her, he didn't smile. He nodded, the way one professional acknowledges another. It was the kind of respect that isn't given, only earned. General Morrison had kept her word. The Pentagon had quietly authorized the program under the banner of anti-terrorism aviation tactics, the kind of designation that meant it wouldn't make the news but would change lives in the shadows. Sarah hadn't flown the Raptor since that day over Los Angeles. The Air Force had offered more than once, but she'd declined. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even disinterest. It was the knowledge that her role had shifted. Someone else would be the hand on the stick next time. Her job was to make sure that when the moment came, they'd be ready. Sometimes she walked the line of aircraft at night when the field was quiet, running her hand along smooth fuselages, the smell of fuel and sun-baked metal in the air. She still kept the old flight suit in her locker, the one with Reaper stitched over the heart. But she didn't wear it. It wasn't a shroud or a trophy. It was just part of her. One evening, after the last training sortie had landed, she stood at the edge of the runway, watching the sun burn down into the horizon. The sound of distant jet engines carried on the cooling air. Jake walked up beside her. Think they'll ever really know what you did that day? Sarah didn't take her eyes off the fading light. Doesn't matter if they do. Why not? She sipped her coffee, the corner of her mouth lifting almost imperceptibly. Because some things aren't about being remembered, she said. They're about making sure there's nothing to remember. The wind shifted. Lights along the runway flickered on, one by one, somewhere in the darkness. A trainer's engine coughed to life for night drills. Sarah turned and headed back toward the hangar, her silhouette folding into the hum of the place she'd rebuilt from the ground up. And sometimes she thought, as the hangar doors rolled closed behind her, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.